sound. Okay. Okay, there we go. Anyways, well, let's just start that back over again. That was completely counterproductive. This is why I need someone else here checking it out. There we go. Okay, guys. So we're back. Thanks for tuning in to the stream. I said a bunch of stuff. I don't know what you guys didn't hear anything. Maybe it was just fun looking at me talking. I don't know what I'm going to do about that when we post the video, but who knows. Anyways, welcome back to Fishing with Livestream. Flying solo here tonight, so Randy is not here to call out my audio mistakes there. Normally Randy's here to join, but tonight I'm just flying solo as Randy's over at the Pickwick Open over on... for the Central Open, Bassmaster Open, stuff like that. So, man, I'm getting texts like crazy. Okay, we're all good. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. Okay, there we go. Awesome. So, tonight, guys, what I want to talk about is how to catch fish in the post-spawn and during the spawn offshore. If you guys watched the recent Bassmaster Elite Series event on Lake Fork, you'll have seen Lee Livesey crushing them on a shad spawn offshore during the spawn. He caught 42 pounds of bass on the last day. Patrick Walters was catching them really well as well offshore, both pre-spawn and post-spawn bass. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of the guys were fishing bedding fish that were spawning during this tournament, but that was not the way to catch really good quality fish and good number of them. Instead, the guys who dominated were fishing offshore. Now, you guys know I love fishing offshore. You also know that fishing offshore during the spawn is not really a common topic that's discussed, but it's something that I do all the time. So I want to kind of share my knowledge on this topic. I've been doing it since I was about 16 years old. I don't really like fishing for spawning bass, and I've just found some ways to catch fish offshore, both with a shad spawn, how to fish for pre-spawn and post-spawn bass early, things like that when the bass are bedding. So I'm going to kind of break it all down for you. Hopefully now the audio is working, so we're going to be able to jump right into it. Again, Randy's over at the Bassmaster Open on Pickwick Lake, so be sure to wish him good luck on his social media pages. And other than that, let's jump into it. Hopefully, we are going to be good for the rest of the stream, but bear with me when I'm flying solo. It's a little bit tough. There's a lot of stuff to manage with the screens, talking, the live chat. You guys know how it is. A lot of stuff going on. So let's start by talking about what went down on Lake Fork. So if we take a look at a Navionics map, I want to show you the exact spot where Lee Livesey caught, or at least some of his giant bass. He didn't catch all of them here, but he caught some of his really big bass, 1 9-pounder, in this creek here on Lake Fork. Lake Fork is in Texas. It's a little bit ahead of most of the country. If you're up like in the Midwest, maybe central part of the United States, the water here on Lake Fork is going to be a little bit warmer, so there's going to be more fish that are kind of in that post-spawn stage, but there's still plenty of fish that were up in these shallow pockets spawning. A lot of guys were catching bedding bass, but the way that Lee Livesey was catching them was pulling up on an island like this, and what you have here is a shallow water area that basically is sitting out here in the middle of the lake. You have a little bit deeper water trench or ditch that runs on the right side of this island, and then you have the creek channels here on the left side. On top of this area here where you see a little bit more dark blue is a very shallow flat or a shallow point that sticks out off of this island. It's maybe 3 to 4 feet deep depending on the lake level, and this is where Lee did all of his damage. Now, you may be wondering, why is he catching fish off this island or whatever out in the middle of the lake? Is he catching spawning fish? What's going on? Well, what happened was that every morning, giant gizzard shad would start spawning out in front of this island on this flat. And basically, gizzard shad are the primary forage for fish on Lake Fork. If you have gizzard shad in your lake, it's going to be the primary forage for the bass, with the exception of maybe a blueback herring lake, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But basically, when you have big gizzard shad spawning that are 6 to 10 inches long, it's basically just like a buffet for the bass. And what does it mean when these gizzard shads spawn? Well, basically what's happening is that if we take a look at Google Earth, and I'm just going to switch over here really quick to Google Earth. Let me transition over here, make sure I'm doing this correctly. Here we go. If we go over to Google Earth, we can pull up this exact same island right here. And as you can see, when it's at normal level, you can almost see the outline of some shallower water right here where the screen's a little bit brighter. But if we take this lake back in time and look at an older satellite image of this area, what you'll see is that this island has something very unique off the tip of it. If we scroll in just a little bit right here, we have an old house foundation right there. See that old house foundation right there? There's literally the outline of a house. On top of that house foundation, you have the old cement from the house. That cement is hard bottom. And on Lake Fork, that is absolutely critical to getting bit. What happens is that on a lot of these islands and stuff, you have silted mud bottom. But when you have an area like this where you have a hard bottom area created by a house foundation, looks like there might be a little bit of rock up here too, not sure what that is. A lot of times also you'll have shell beds, which are like mussel shell beds that'll get washed up, and that's what a lot of guys were catching their fish on as well. But at least in this specific area, it was this old house foundation. And the reason this is really important is because this is where your gizzard shad are going to spawn. And what they'll do is they'll swim up in the middle of the night when they have low light conditions and lay their eggs throughout the night on top of hard bottom surfaces in less than 2 to 3 feet of water. The reason they want to spawn so shallow is because usually the the eggs need sun to develop and to hatch. So they need to lay their eggs in shallow enough water that the eggs can survive. However, they don't want to lay their eggs so shallow or so close against the bank, because if they get caught up here on the bank, it's very easy for the bass to ambush them. Therefore, a lot of the better places where these shad spawns happen are places where you have shallow water very close to deep water. So over here, if we pull up that Navionics map again, you'll notice that there is a little bit deeper water. There's actually a creek channel right here in 24 feet of water. And what can happen is that these gizzard shad can set up in this creek channel throughout the day, and as they kind of are resting from the spawning process, and then when they want to lay their eggs, they can quickly move up, spawn on this point. They can also set up over here, a little bit deeper water, spawn on this point, lay their eggs really quickly, and then pull back out into deeper water. The eggs then get laid in an area where there's enough sunlight they can hatch, and those shad can escape the shallow water area and not get ambushed that much by the bass. However, what you'll find is that as these shad move up and start to spawn, there's a key window, especially during tournaments, where you can capitalize on the bass feeding on these gizzard shad. What'll happen is that every morning when that sun just starts to peek over the horizon, you'll have low light conditions still for the first, let's say, hour of the day. And those shad will be spawning like crazy. They'll start in the middle of the night and they'll just keep spawning. This usually happens, by the way, when the water temperature hits about 65 degrees. Though I have seen the shad spawn as early as water temperatures in the 60s and as high as water temperatures in the 75 degree range. So it kind of varies. You kind of just have to get lucky almost to find it and have it happening on your lake. And it will happen on different parts of the lake at different times. So for example, you might have a really strong shad spawn in this creek, but there might be no shad spawn up in this creek. It will vary from where you are in the lake. So it seemed like a lot of the guys who were capitalized on the shad spawn bite were on the lower end of Lake Fork. Didn't seem like it was happening as much up the lake, like way up in the upper reaches of the lake. Maybe it was already done by then, I'm not 100% sure, but you kind of have to play the area of the lake really carefully with this. Now what was going on is that the shad would spawn on this area the first hour of the morning, and Lee would come up and he'd throw a big topwater, a big swim bait over the top of this house foundation where those shad were laying their eggs, and those bass would move up there to ambush them and eat them. It was a really, really good deal, and those fish would just gorge on those shad. And this is something that I've done for years, guys. I've been doing this since I was like 16 years old, and I kind of want to show you how I first started getting into this pattern, and then how I've developed it across different lakes across the country. Because Lake Fork is just one lake, and it doesn't work on every single lake, but it works on a lot of different lakes. The key with this, though, is you have to have gizzard shad. You have to have some type of shad, whether that's threadfin shad, gizzard shad, blueback herring. This is not going to work if your lake has no shad in it. If you're on a natural lake where there's just bluegill or perch or whatever, this is not going to be a bite you can do. Now, there are a couple other ways you can fish offshore in the pre-spawn, post-spawn, during the spawn as well, which I'll kind of cover. But I'm going to kind of start focusing on the shad spawn deal for the first few minutes here. So what I want to do is take you over to a new lake. And this is actually where I learned how to fish this shad spawn. And this is Lake Dardanelle. I took you over here to Piney Bay on Lake Dardanelle. And I want to kind of give you an idea using Navionics of what I did to kind of figure out this pattern. And this is something, again, I figured this out a long, long time ago in Lake Dardanelle when I was like 16. And what happens is that on Lake Dardanelle, whenever those fish are spawning and getting up in this shallow backwater areas, the shallow grass, things like this, where you can see it's very shallow, all these guys will go straight to the bank. And this part of this whole bay, Piney Bay on Lake Dardanelle, just gets absolutely hammered by guys fishing down the shallow water willow, shallow laydown, stuff like that. And there's just fishing pressure everywhere. And I just got sick of it. I just honestly didn't like fishing right behind 50 other guys. So what I started doing is whenever the water temperature hit 65 degrees, I would basically abandon the shallow water areas, and I would start looking for shallow water close to deep water, but that's close to the spawning ground. So you kind of need all three elements. You need some shallow water like you have up here. You need some deep water access like this 20 foot of water right here, and then a flat shallow area in between them. This is one of my key little spots that I catch a ton of fish on in May, on Lake Dardanelle, late April. And what happens is that these bass that first move in to spawn, a lot of them will move in here like last week of March if we get a warming trend earlier in the spring. And it kind of, the timing of this fluctuates year to year. So like some years, the first wave of bass will spawn in March, and then you'll have a good wave of post-spawn bass at the end of April. Sometimes they don't spawn until the middle of April, and that way you don't have a good post-spawn group of fish until like the middle of May. So you kind of have to play it by ear as the timing of this goes. But basically, what you're going to want to do is go into an area like this and just see what the water temperature is like, and just see if some shad are kicking around, if you're getting a few bites. And you may have to kind of check this out in a couple different parts of the lake. They might not be biting over here in Piney Bay, but they might be having this bite happen down in Illinois Bayou or way up the river up here. I've kind of seen it happen all over the place. And what I do is actually search this out. I will hunt it out. And the way I do that is basically twofold. First, I'm looking for shad. And specifically, I'm looking for shad on my fish finder. So if I pull up a recording here of some shad, let me just pull this up real quick. I want to show you kind of what I'm looking for. You need to see shad in your fish finder to get this pattern to work. So it's pointless if you're just rolling around fishing just in the middle of nowhere. So if I pull this up real quick, I'll show you what some shad look like on my fish finder right here. So we got some shad right here and right here. And a lot of times these shad are going to be setting up in deeper water. They'll be setting up over 10, 15, 20 feet of water for most of the day. This is kind of where they sit and relax before they kind of spawn throughout the night. A lot of times those shad won't be up there in really shallow water all day long. They're going to be out kind of suspended over deeper water, a little bit further off the bank. If we kind of take a look where that might be, they're not going to be setting up a lot of times way up here shallow all day. Instead, they're going to be setting up off the or off the drop in the channel. So a lot of times I'll be graphing around looking for bait fish on my graph. If I find bait fish, I'm then going to look for areas where those shad can spawn. On Lake Dardanelle, the key thing I'm looking for are shell beds. Shell beds are basically where mussel shells kind of accumulate due to current, though there are places where there's old house foundations, old boat ramps, stuff like that, where I've had the shad spawn happen as well. But really, I'm just looking for a hard bottom area, it doesn't really matter what it is, in 2 to 4 feet of water, 2 to 5 feet of water that is close to deep water with shallow water spawning grounds close by. What I'll then is basically I will look in this zone, in that 2 to 4 foot zone, and I will drag a bait really slow, like a Carolina rig or like a big 10-inch worm, if I'm fishing in the middle of the day, to feel for that hard bottom area. It's sometimes hard to graph for it. I do have some tricks and stuff that I won't share here. I talk about that in my advanced electronics seminar, stuff like that. But basically, there's ways you can identify the hard bottom. And then what I'll do is I will see if I can get some bites during the middle of the day. Usually you can get 1 bite, 2 bites, stuff like that on these spots. And then what I'll do on tournament day or the next day if I'm coming out to fish is I will roll in here first hour of the morning, right when that sun's up, and probably 50% of the time, 30 to 50% of the time, you'll have the shad spawning up on an area like this. If there's a bunch of shad out here, there's going to be shad spawning up on this shallow flat right here. And I can pull up and just absolutely crush them. And I've had days, I got this spot, where in the first 45 minutes of the day, I'm catching 5 fish for 23 pounds, and I have 2 to 3 limits of 3 to 4 pounders off this spot. And there's a bunch of other spots around here. I'm not going to share them all. I have some really good juice here. But I can't share all of that because some of it my friends still fish and things like that. But this is a pretty big community hole now. It wasn't when I was 16, but that was 10 years ago. So basically, this is what I'm fishing. Now, if we take a look at some of the baits I'm fishing, let me switch back over here. I'll kind of give you guys an idea of some of the baits that I'm throwing. So first up, my number one go-to bait in this situation is, on Lake Dardanelle specifically, is a big squarebill crankbait. This is a Strike King 8.0 crankbait. I mean, it's really big. If you compare it to my hand, it's a big bait. If you compare it, let me just, actually, here's just a regular head and Zara spook. It's basically the same size as a Zara spook. This is not your regular 1.5 squarebill. This is a Magnum squarebill, like 4 inches long. When I'm fishing Lake Dardanelle, I have gizzard shad in the lake. And what happens with gizzard shad is they get very big. So you need a big profile bait to get those fish to bite. Now, with this type of bait, you're not going to expect to just catch fish like this all the time on this bait. You're not just going to take this and throw this down the bank on a normal fishing day. But when those fish are keying on those gizzard shad during that shad spawn, this is just a deadly option. And one of the guys finished in the top 5 at Lake Fork throwing this exact bait on the shad spawn, just like I'm talking about this past weekend. And I've caught so many big fish on the Strike King 8.0 over the years, just doing the shad spawn on shallow shell beds, shallow house foundations, road beds, whatever I can find where those shad are spawning. The second bait I throw, which is what Lee Livesey caught a ton of fish on, is a big topwater bait. And when you have gizzard shad to get in your lake, you want something that's big. He was throwing a saltwater Zara spook. Here's just a regular head and Zara spook. Here's my Magnum. This is a river to sea mag dog. Or no, not river to sea. This is a 6 Sense mag dog. So it's a giant topwater. You can see how much bigger that is than a regular Zara spook. This is a 6-inch long giant topwater. And I will put this on a big rod, fire that thing out there, and just walk it as fast and as hard as possible. Just walking side to side, working across the surface really fast. And when they're up there, this bait is so hard to beat. I've thrown a bunch of other ones over the years. This is just the one I have now. But I've had a bunch of different ones. I used to throw like the old like cotton cordell, like the I don't even know what they're called. They have the long cupped bill on them. I can't think of the name quite right now, but this is a really good bait right there, that mag dog. And then one more bait I've caught a ton of fish on is a big swim bait. Recently, I've been throwing the Mega Bass Mag Draft over the last few years on a 3/8 ounce flashy swimmer head that works, or a hook, swim bait hook, that works really well. I used to throw a 7-inch Bass Trick swim bait on a similar setup over the years. That was a really good bait for me. And then one other bait that's kind of a sleeper that you can't really get anymore, and I just have them in like a little plastic baggie here because they're discontinued, and I don't have that many of them left, but I'm hoping to maybe work with Jewel to figure something out, is a 7-inch fluke. And this is a big-bodied 7-inch Strike King caffeine shad. This bait, oh my gosh, guys, is an absolute hammer. I don't throw it very often because I don't have that many of them left, but it is a Magnum fluke. I'll put it on a big 7/0 hook, and you basically just cast that thing out, burn it, and stop it. Burn it, stop it. And I have caught some absolute giants on a 7-inch fluke. Same situations, all with the gizzard shad. Now, this is all on lakes where you have those gizzard shads spawning offshore in that, really when a lot of the bass are spawning, some of the bass are post-spawn, maybe some of the bass are even pre-spawn still, feeding up on these big gizzard shad on these shad spawns. But not every lake has big gizzard shad. So I kind of want to get into that topic. We'll talk about regular threadfin shad situations, and also when you have herring in your lake, which is what the guys did on Lake Hartwell for the FLW tournament that they had over there. It's now the Big Five, Major League Big Five tournament that they had over there. And the guys were catching them schooling on herring and doing the exact same thing. Some of the guys were sight fishing, but a lot of guys were catching them offshore. So there's a bunch of, and people are saying, don't cover all my secrets, man. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this. There's not many people on tonight, so share out the stream, guys, if you guys are enjoying, if you find this helpful. Actually, probably none of you guys want to share out the stream. But if you guys are enjoying this, hopefully you share out the stream, let people know about it. Really quick, before we switch topics to the threadfin shad and the herring, want to let you guys know about a couple upcoming seminars we have going on over on our website, fishthemoment.com. If you guys like the breakdown I'm doing right now over the herring bite, all that stuff, or the gizzard shad deal, definitely head over to the virtual seminars page on the website and check out some of the upcoming virtual seminars we're offering. If you take a look here, a couple of them we're offering. Let me pull this off real quick. There we go. You can actually see what I'm showing. First seminar is an offshore summer secrets seminar, or an advanced offshore summer fishing seminar on man-made lakes. In this seminar, I'm going to be covering all of my secret techniques for catching tough-to-catch offshore bass in the summer. A lot of guys probably have noticed that there's a lot more fishing pressure offshore, especially in the summertime as offshore fishing gets more popular. And there's a lot of techniques that I've developed over the last 2 to 3 years that allow me to catch a lot of suspended fish, a lot of inactive fish, and a lot of isolated fish that other anglers do not target and do not know how to catch. And I would definitely recommend signing up for the seminar if you want to step up your offshore game this summer, especially if you want to compete in tournaments. This is going to be a great seminar for you. It's actually going to be this Thursday. We only have 7 spots left, so it's almost full already. So definitely check out the seminar and sign up before it's out. The next seminar is a seasonal bass movement seminar that I'll be talking about, that I'll be doing on man-made lakes, again with shad or herring. In this seminar, I'm going to talk about how weather conditions, lake conditions, water level, all these other factors impact seasonal bass movement, how they move from the backs of the creeks to the main lake, how the thermocline affects bass movement, all these different factors that will help you stay with fish year-round and track their movement. So definitely check out both those seminars over on the website, fishthemoment.com. Okay, let's get back to talking about these different lakes. So we talked a little bit about Lake Fork, or Lee Livesey called them, on that offshore shad spawn deal. Another lake I want to kind of talk about a little bit is Table Rock Lake. On Table Rock Lake, this is more of like a deep, clear lake. Doesn't have a ton of gizzard shad. There are some gizzard shad in this lake, and there is a gizzard shad spawn, but there's a lot more threadfin shad than gizzard shad on Table Rock Lake. There's a lot of lakes like this around the country. You might have a Lake Cherokee, a Cumberland Lake over in Tennessee. There's a bunch of lakes over in North Carolina that are deeper and clear that's set up like this as well. And when I'm fishing a lake like this, the key that I find is that to get these fish to bite offshore during the spawn, you need to find those fish that are still in a pre-spawn mode or just getting into a post-spawn mode. And what you'll find is that those shad will spawn during that 65 to 70 degree water temperature, but they'll spawn a little bit deeper than they do on the lakes with gizzard shad. Especially on Table Rock Lake here, for example, you'll have a lot of areas where the water has 8 to 10 foot of visibility, super clear water. When that water is clear, it means that those shad can lay their eggs deeper, and they can lay them, let's say, in 8, 10, 15 feet of water, and those eggs can still survive. Also, a lot of bass can spawn in that same range, especially if you have 10 foot of water visibility. This means that you don't necessarily need to find those super shallow areas that are up here in 2 foot of water like this to find the shad spawn. Instead, a lot of the best areas are going to be a little bit deeper, out in that 12 to 15 foot range, and those shad will still be up there spawning, but also because that water is clear, usually it's going to extend that spawning period a little bit more. You're going to have bass that are in a pre-spawn mode still, you're going to have bass that are spawning, and bass in a post-spawn mode. It's going to be kind of a wider range of fish. And the pre-spawn bass and the post-spawn bass are both going to take advantage of that shad spawn on, again, these shallower, flatter points. Now, the key on these type of lakes is that you want to find a rounded point just like this, that's pretty shallow on top. Let's say the top of it's in 4 or 5 foot of water, but then it gradually tapers off to 12 to 15 feet of water, maybe to 20 feet of water. On top of these areas, you're going to find some type of rock. Usually you're going to find a rock pile or a grouping of bigger rocks mixing with like chunk rock or pea gravel. And those bigger groupings of rock are what attract those shad to spawn. So if you can find a larger section of rock, you're going to be in business. I'll show you on my sonar recordings here what I'm talking about when I mean the bigger sections of rock. Let me pull this up really quick. Normally Randy's talking. I can kind of disguise all of my transitions. Here we go. Let me go over here. So here's kind of what I'm talking about with one of these rocky spots on one of these flat points. You can see the bottom here is pretty flat and narrow like this. And if you want to take a look right here, you can see there's a flat bottom area where there's just nothing, maybe just some straight gravel, some sand, and then there's isolated patches of thicker rock. This is where those shad will spawn in the post-spawn on a lot of these lakes. Now, on these deep clear lakes, again, you're going to have post-spawn fish, pre-spawn fish, and you're going to have some fish that might even be spawning this deep. Like if you have smallmouth in your lake, smallmouth will spawn all the way out here. So it's going to be a great place that congregates a ton of fish. In addition, because these spots are slightly deeper, you'll find that a lot of these bass are actually going to stay there throughout the day a lot longer. When you have that shad spawn deal on dirtier water lakes that are shallower, like Lake Dardanelle, a Lake Fork, where you have maybe 2 to 3 foot of visibility, those fish will move up into these areas, feed really heavy in the morning as those shad are spawning, then kind of pull off or just kind of swim around and roam. They don't actually kind of stay up there. But on a lake like Table Rock, where you have deeper water, 10-foot of water visibility, and these shad spawn deeper, a lot of those bass will still hang out around these areas, these rocky areas, throughout the entire day. You can then catch these fish on a lot of baits. One of my favorite baits is just throwing a little 3-inch swim bait, a little strike can, or a little Megabass spark shad, just reeling it down there super slow, scrubbing it across these points. And scrubbing it basically means like just basically making it bump the bottom along these points. And then I'll also throw baits like a swing head jig, a shaky head. A bunch of different baits work this time of year. And let me switch back over here. A bunch of different baits work this time of year. And really what you're focused on is you're just trying to put your boat, a lot of times out here in maybe 20 foot of water to 30 feet of water, casting up in that 8 to 15 foot range and working those isolated rocky patches. To find them, I just basically graph with my side imaging around these rounded points. And a lot of times you'll find that you can catch fish on these type of points kind of halfway back in the creeks, off the main lake. They kind of spread out and do a little bit of everything. Now, if you have smallmouth in the lake like Table Rock, you usually find that there's going to be more largemouth and spotted bass back in the creeks. And then as you get further towards the dam and things like that, you'll find a lot more smallmouth near the first third of the creek, the mouth of the creek, and also by the main lake. So those smallmouth are really good a lot of times in the spawning time of year because the smallmouth will spawn first, and you can catch a lot of fish grouped up offshore, a lot of smallmouth grouped up offshore in the first thirds of the creeks on these similar areas I've been showing you, like this long point that sticks out. And they'll be schooling on shad, they'll be busting up shad on the bottom as well. And it can be a great way to catch fish. And again, all this is happening, a lot of times there's going to be a ton of fish that are actually spawning up in the backs of these pockets. So you're going to have fish that are in the backs of these pockets spawning like crazy. And what will happen is that, again, a lot of guys are going to move into the backs of these pockets. They're going to be trying to catch sightfish, try to catch those post-spawn cruisers. But you'll know better because you've watched this stream, and you're going to head out to the main part of the lake, head out in these shallow tapering points and find those shad they're spawning and find those bass that are in that post-spawn mood grouped up. And if you can get on these post-spawn fish, guys, before everyone else, if everyone's still up here in the shallow pockets and you're fishing for those post-spawn fish first, just like Lee Livesey did on Lake Fork, you can catch some of the biggest bags of fish of the year, and you're going to catch a lot of numbers of big fish. A lot of times those fish are the most aggressive right when they pull off the bank, right when they first get offshore. However, as soon as those spawning fish are no longer up there in the shallow pockets, guys will immediately start moving back offshore, and then all these areas get a ton of pressure again, and it's hard to catch those fish. So there's a little tiny window, like a 1 or 2 week window, usually every single spring, where guys are still up shallow, no one's offshore, and if you can find them out there, you're going to dominate, just like those guys did at Lake Fork. Pretty good example of that, honestly. So let's see here. Looks like got some stuff here. Okay, just want to make sure we didn't have anything crazy. My screen wasn't showing, my audio was off, all that stuff. Okay, so next thing I want to show you guys is I wanted to show you how this kind of works on a different style of fishery, like a Tennessee River lake. So this is Pickwick Lake. This is actually where Randy is for his Bassmaster Open. And if it were me and I kind of had to fish that Open this weekend, I'm going to kind of maybe do a little prediction here of kind of how some guys are going to catch him. I would be thinking that there's going to be some fish on Pickwick that are still up in the shallow pocket spawning. There's always fish that are up here spawning on Pickwick this time of year. However, I think that the winning pattern is going to be someone who finds a group of those post-spawn fish on a shad spawn off the main river. And a lot of the places you're going to find these fish are on these main river bars and main river flats where you have very shallow water next to deeper water, just like I showed earlier on Lake Dardanelle. A lot of these places now currently on Pickwick have a lot of grass in them. And on lakes that have grass and shad, those shad will lay their eggs in and around the grass, but they're usually going to lay them in areas where there's hard bottom underneath the grass, which in a lot of cases is going to be a shell bed, a rocky spot, stuff like that. Usually you can find these areas by looking for high spots on a contour map where you see the lake coming up a little bit shallower in that 3 foot of water, 5 foot of water on these flats, those darker blue circles there, right here, 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 and here. And this is like one of the perfect places to find some of these post-spawn, shad spawn fish, these post-spawn fish as they move out. You have a creek channel right here that runs into the back of this area where maybe some fish might spawn back in here. They then follow this creek channel out, and then before it drops off from kind of the shallow flat into this deeper water, you have kind of an intersection where you have this deeper creek channel, meaning the secondary creek channel, and then you have a little point right here. This is an ideal place for shells to congregate, and if there's going to be shad in this area, I can almost guarantee you, if you can find shad in an area like this week on Pickwick, you're going to absolutely light them up in the first hour of the morning. So this is the type of stuff I'd be looking for, a little bit more off the bank, a little bit more like main lake sort of deal, but that's just kind of how it works on the Tennessee River. Another example is on lakes like a Lake Hartwell, and actually I was reading over here, I thought it was Lake Hartwell, it's actually Lake Murray, so let me go back over to Lake Murray, messed that one up a little bit, but Lake Murray is where these guys were for that Tackle Warehouse Pro Circuit event for the Big Five, Major League Fishing, FLW, whatever people are calling it nowadays. And basically what they were doing on Lake Murray is they were going on to areas where you have very flat, shallow points. So if you take a look at some of these points here on Lake Murray, you have some points that are going to be steeper. So for example, you have a nice steep point right here where the contour lines are pretty tight together, it's rounded, and it drops off quickly. This is not what you're really looking for during this kind of post-spawn period, during this shad spawn deal. Instead, what you want to find are points, I'm just going to kind of roll over here. You want to find points that are sticking off the bank, like this one right here, and it's very shallow off the tip of this point. If you take a look right here, in this area right here, it's maybe 3, 4, 5 feet of water. It says 6 or 7 feet, but a lot of times these maps are not quite right. So I would expect that this might be 2, 3, 4 foot of water up on top of this point, extending out into deeper water. This is going to be an ideal candidate for the shad to spawn. On Lake Murray, you're not dealing with gizzard shad or herring, or gizzard shad or threadfin though. You're dealing with blueback herring. Blueback herring are kind of a completely different animal from other types of shad. What you'll find is that bass on these herring lakes will pass up 10 gizzard shad to eat one herring. But they do kind of feed similar ways. You'll find that the bass are going to be feeding on those spawning herring first hour of the morning up on top of these points. And at times, too, those herring might even move up throughout the day to move up on these points as well. There's just kind of small windows where those herring move in. But the key bite is that first hour, hour and a half of the morning. And those bass basically will pull up, feed on those herring as those herring spawn on the shallow point. And then as the day progresses, those herring move off the point. And those bass will slide out just a little bit deeper out in here, the 10 to 15 foot range. Now, sometimes you can catch those fish on like a little shaky head or a Carolina rig, but I did watch an interview with the winner of the Lake Murray tournament, and he said he wasn't able to actually catch any of these fish in that 10 to 15 foot range on a shaky head. The only way to get them to bite is when they were up on top of these shallow points, schooling and feeding on those herring. Now, what was he throwing out there? Well, because those herring are not quite as big as the gizzard shad, a key bait for a lot of the guys last week is a fluke. This is a 5-inch Strike King caffeine shad. A 4 to 5 inch bait is perfect to imitate a herring, as opposed to a gizzard shad where I want to throw a lot bigger bait like a giant spook. Those herrings get a little bit smaller than those gizzard shad. Those gizzard shad are a little bit bigger. So a little 5-inch fluke, maybe just a standard size topwater, a standard size czar spook, stuff like that. That's what you're kind of dealing with when you're fishing for herring fish. And the way that the winner of the Lake Murray tournament was catching them is taking that caffeine shad, firing it up on top of this point, and then basically pulling it with his rod, pulling it to the side, reeling up his slack and pulling it. And he was just basically pulling it really fast across this point, barely letting it stop for maybe a half a second. And when those fish are schooling on points like this, if you can pull a fluke across their head or work a topwater across their head right as they're busting on those shad or those herring, you can absolutely hammer them. And on a lake like this, there's a lot of points where these herring might spawn. So you kind of have to almost get lucky to pull up on a point where those bass are up there busting on the shad and where or busting on the herring where the herring are spawning. What a lot of guys will do then is they will basically find these shallow flat points like this and run 10 to 15 of them in the first hour and a half of the morning. They'll pull up, they'll make 10 to 15 casts, maybe 10 casts, stay there for 8 minutes. If they don't get bit, they rip up the trolling motor and they run to the next point. And they may in practice have already identified the points that have shad kind of in the general vicinity, like a point like this or a point like this. Maybe they found some shad, again, like I showed earlier, on their graph out in front. They keep on saying shad, I mean herring. They find herring out in front of these points, and then they'll basically check them during practice in the mornings to see which ones actually have a herring spawn going on. They'll then run every single point within maybe a 3 to 4 mile area where those herring are spawning, and if they hit on the right point, they might catch 2 or 3 fish. Then they run to the next one, and if you can hit 2 points in the first hour and a half of the day where those herring are up, a lot of times you can catch 3 to 7 bass, and you're in business. Now, if you look at the results of this tournament, a lot of guys didn't actually catch a limit for all 3 days of the tournament. A lot of guys caught 3 fish for 9 pounds, 4 fish for 16 pounds, and they didn't quite make it to the final day because it's kind of a crapshoot. You're running all these points and just kind of pulling up, hoping that there's a good school of good fish on these points. You might pull up on one point and catch 3 4-pounders. And the next morning you pull up, you catch 3 2-pounders. It kind of just depends on what quality fish decide to use those points that day. And I think a lot of guys kind of knew what was happening here, so it wasn't like everyone was in the dark. I just feel like the guys who were able to win either knew how to identify which points had the better quality fish on them, or they had a bait that was producing better quality fish, or they just got lucky and they hit their timing right every day better than everyone else. Maybe they didn't hit it perfect every day, but they hit it 3 days or 2 of the 4 days. They had really great rotations. They had decent rotations the next 2 days, and that was enough to help them win. So that's kind of the deal on this herring bite. And I know that Randy made a video a couple days ago about how it's not a good idea to actually chase the shad spawn or the herring spawn in the spring. The reason he kind of said that is because when you're dealing with a lake as big as Lake Murray, if those shad are spawning, it's only going to happen for the first hour and a half of the day. And it's not like you can have points that are set up all over this lake. Like you can't run from this point to a point back in here and try to get that herring spawn to work or the shad spawn to work. You have to have points that are pretty close together, they're pretty tight together, because you only have an hour and a half of the day to actually catch those fish. In addition, there's times where you might find them in practice busting on a point, and then for whatever reason the next morning they're just not there. They don't bust, they don't bite. One thing I know that I do probably more than Randy though is I will run and gun areas a lot faster. I will pull up, drop my trolling motor for 4 or 5 minutes, see if they're there, and then run again. And I might run 10 spots in the first hour of the day, spending 5 minutes on each spot. I also plan to try to run 10 different areas by picking points and things like that that are in closer proximity so that I'm not running all the way around the lake. This takes a lot of preparation though, and it might take your entire practice just to try dial in this pattern. And even then, you might not hit the rotation right and not catch them in the tournament. So it's definitely a risky proposition, but if you do it correctly, you can absolutely hammer them. And again, if we take a look at some of the results from that Bassmaster tournament, let me just transition over here. really quick. I kind of want to show you what I mean by this kind of being a, let's see here. Trying to pull up the results from the Slate Fork tournament really quick. Just give me half a second here. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So if I pull up this real quick, I want to show you kind of the discrepancies in the weights, especially with like Lee Livesey. If we go day by day with the results, let's see here. So if we go day one results, you can see Lee Livesey had 25 pounds the first day. So pretty good, obviously, catching some really good fish, had 25 pounds the first day. Patrick Walters had 32 pounds to lead it. We switch to day two. This is just going to take a second. Day two, you can see, it kind of shows it. That's nice. Let me see if we can do all the weights here combined. I don't know how this Bassmaster website works. They kind of have a weird setup going on. Scrolling in here, just give it a second. I don't know what's going on with the internet. It's probably because I'm streaming and trying to load Bassmaster. There we go. So if you look at Lee Livesey's weights, he had 25 pounds one day, 17 pounds on day two, 26 pounds, then 42 pounds. This is his awesome day where he absolutely hammered him. But he had one day in there that was kind of a stinker. He didn't quite get the shad spawn to work probably as well. Maybe he had to rely on some sight fish or some different things. Same thing happened with Patrick Walters. He had a 32-pound day and a 31-pound day, but in between there, he had a 15-pound day and a 22-pound day. If he could have been consistent all 3 days, he would have won the tournament and blown it out. But with that shad spawn, it's just not as consistent as you would like it to be. Now, there are guys like Quentin Capo who was kind of able to keep it somewhat consistent, and those fish were biting throughout the day in short spurts, and you could catch some fish still throughout the day that were more in a post-spawn mood. Maybe the shad started to move into feed. They were like post-spawn shad. There's a bunch of stuff to go into, but it's all different strategies, things like that. But as you can kind of see, Lee did like the live by the sword, die by the sword, and he hit a home run the last day, but he definitely had some difficulties the second day. So it's definitely a risk-reward proposition with this offshore kind of shad spawn bite in the post-spawn. So let's see here. If we go to, oh man, we got Joe over here throwing shade, saying that I am not as good as a professional fisherman who just won a big tournament. I don't know if that's a burn. That's kind of, obviously he's fishing professionally. I'm doing a live stream on YouTube, so I don't know how to take that one. But anyways, hopefully you guys don't think I'm just completely crazy over here. The stream isn't getting many viewers, so I don't know. Maybe you guys are thinking I'm crazy. Probably didn't help that I wasn't talking for the first 5 minutes. I was on mute. But anyways, that is kind of what I had to cover on the offshore during the spawn. Usually I have Randy to kind of bounce off with me, but I want to take some time to answer some questions from you guys since normally I don't get to do that, and I think it'd be nice just to answer some questions for about 10 to 15 minutes with you. So let's take a look at some questions, and I'm actually going to kind of scroll through these really quick just to take a look. One thing I do want to do really fast, if you guys do have questions, actually this is a good idea. If you guys have questions, go down in the live chat and type @fishthemoment and then leave your question, and I'll be able to see all of your questions a lot easier, and I won't have to scroll through as much. And while you guys are going through, just type @fishthemoment, or actually it's @fishthemoment live, and then put your question. While you're doing that, I'm just going to do one more shameless plug. You guys know, got to pay the bills. And what I want to talk about really quick, just for a few minutes, is our upcoming virtual seminars over on fishthemoment.com. So if you guys don't know already, fishthemoment.com is where we have a lot of our premium content. And if you head over to our virtual seminars page, we have a couple upcoming virtual seminars. The first one is an advanced offshore fishing seminar for summer bass. And in this seminar, I'm going to be focusing on sharing my techniques for catching bass that are inactive and tough to catch during the summer. A lot of guys are starting to fish offshore, and basically all of the obvious offshore areas are getting hammered. This means that fish are getting more pressured, they're hard to catch on the community holes, and also you may have to extend yourself past the community holes to find those sneaky offshore areas that other guys aren't fishing. In the seminar, I'm going to kind of cover both topics, both how to catch fish on community holes using unique baits, retrieves, and techniques that will allow you to catch fish right behind other anglers on highly pressured spots. I'll also talk about how to find isolated areas that other anglers won't be fishing to pull off some really big fish that no one else is going to be targeting this summer. That seminar is coming up this Thursday, so definitely check it out over on fishmoment.com. I think there's 6 or 7 spots left, so sign up before it's all filled up. Again, that's this Thursday. Another seminar I'm going to be doing is my seasonal bass movement seminar. I've done this seminar once already. It was a big success. And in this seminar, I talk about how water conditions, weather conditions, lake level, a bunch of different environmental factors impact how bass move throughout a lake throughout the entire year. I'll be talking about how they transition from the spawn, pre-spawn, post-spawn, why they move, maybe why some of these stages might be delayed because of water level changes, water clarity changes. There's so many factors that go into it, and this is definitely one of my most information-packed seminars. If you're struggling to find bass consistently on your home lake, any time of the year, this is a seminar for you. It will help you dial in where you need to start looking in each season of the year based on the actual conditions, not just by looking at a calendar, and you'll be able to find fish a lot faster than you would without this information. So if you want to check out the seminar, again, it's over on fishthemoment.com. That one's going to be coming up here on May 13th. So you have a little bit of time on that one, but then this offshore seminar is coming up here very, very soon. Awesome. So that is it for the shameless plugs. Let me pull, oh, where's my face? Let me pull this back over here, and I'm going to start answering a few questions. Okay. Let's see. A couple questions here. Can you talk about fishing gizzard shad fisheries up north? The bass don't get as big, so do they still eat gizzard shad? So, Chris, on a lot of those northern lakes, you're not going to have gizzard shad, unfortunately. I don't talk about a lot of the northern lakes as much just because most of our audience doesn't fish up north. That's just kind of how it works, unfortunately. But if we go to a lake up north, you're not going to have gizzard shad, really. A lot of times you're going to have either golden shiner, you might have alewife. Sometimes some of the lakes, like in Pennsylvania, you might have a few like outlier lakes that might have some shad in them. But 90% of fisheries are not going to have shad. For example, if you go to like a Lake Cayuga, you may have some golden shiner in there, you may have a few alewife, but mainly your primary forage are going to be perch and bluegill. Perch and bluegill will act completely different from shad. They have a whole different cycle of how they move, how they live. There's so much I could get into on that. It's a completely different topic that would take a lot of time to explain. Same thing if you're on like a Lake Oneida, if you're on a Great Lake, like a Lake Erie or Lake St. Clair, whatever it is. There's a bunch of different things that change as you go to these northern lakes. The type of cover the fish set up on, the type of structure, everything is completely different. And I know it's frustrating because you're probably like, well, you know, how does the information you talk about on these southern fisheries translate? And it really, not that much of it does, unfortunately. I grew up in Wisconsin, actually, like Big Green Lake's one of the first lakes I ever fished when I was growing up. And I lived here until I was 13 years old. I fished like 40 tournaments in Wisconsin by the time I was 12 years old. So I'm very familiar with fishing on northern fisheries. I just haven't really made much content because no one, there's a very small percentage of my audience that actually is from up north. But I'm going to be planning to make a few videos, doing a few seminars for you guys up north here in the future here. And I'll be over on fishmoment.com. But yeah, not really a big gizzard shad situation going on up in the north. Okay, next question. Have you gotten on a good offshore bite in straight chocolate milk? That's from Waze. So yeah, so I have before. It's a very specific situation. So I'll kind of explain it. It happened on Lake Dardanelle a few years ago. Lake Dardanelle is connected on the Arkansas River. And on the Arkansas River, you have obviously no control of the water clarity because anytime it rains really bad, especially up in Oklahoma, it just washes out the whole chain. Now what happened was that on Lake Dardanelle, I was catching some really good fish offshore in this section of the lake in Illinois Bayou. And I'll kind of just there was a bunch of brush piles out here. And there's bunch of brush piles down this bank in, let's say, 8 to 12 feet of water. And the week before I started catching fish off these brush piles out here, the water clarity was, let's say, 2 to 2.5 foot of visibility. Not super clear, but clear enough to catch them in that depth range. However, the next week, a ton of rain came through. I mean, an absolute torrent of rain came through and muddied up the entire system. On the areas where I was fishing the week prior, the water visibility dropped from 2 feet of visibility to like 4 inches of visibility. It was absolutely ridiculous. However, during that week time, it really was just like a 3 or 4 day time, the water on the surface was very muddy, but the water down below near the bottom wasn't nearly as muddy. And also, a lot of the shad were still setting up in this area. There were gizzard shad up there, and they were hanging out. And whenever you have really, really muddy water that comes in, there's like a 2 or 3 day window, maybe a 5 day window, where the shad will still hang out deeper on those offshore areas because there's still going to be plankton growing on those areas. There's going to be sunlight hitting those areas. So there's like a 3 or 4 day window where you can catch those fish in that chocolate milk. However, after the 3 or 4 day period, basically the shad are going to use up all the food that's available in those areas. They'll start making their move, and they'll usually move up shallower, up into the shallow bank grass, stuff like that. So usually if you have really, really muddy water that rolls in very quickly, there will be an offshore bite for 3 or 4 or 5 days, but then it's going to stop pretty quickly, and you're going to have to go back to fishing up shallow. Now, same reverse thing happens. If for whatever reason then there's no rain for a couple weeks and it clears up from 6 inches visibility back to 2 feet, those fish will jump back offshore relatively quickly. However, when that water temperature is 2 foot, what you'll find is that even though there's plenty of water visibility for the fish to be offshore, because all those fish were up shallow, it's going to take them a little bit of time to transition back offshore. So they don't immediately jump from the shallow water back offshore. The water needs to kind of set up a little bit, the plankton needs to continue to grow, the shad need to move back out there, and so there's a kind of a transition process. So kind of long story short, yes, you can catch them offshore in muddy water, but it's very situational. Now, if you're fishing like the shell bed deal, for example, where you're up in like a foot of water catching them off shallow shell beds up here, then yeah, no problem. You can catch those fish offshore in real muddy water, but you're not really fishing deep. You're fishing in like a foot or two of water. So that's not really necessarily offshore fishing. That's just kind of shallow water fishing away from the bank. Okay, next question. Let's see here. Concerning electronics, since you've now got the megahertz units, when do you run 455 and when do you run 800? And when do you run mega? So that's from Justin. Basically, I run mega imaging all the time on my Humminbird. That's just kind of the way I do it. There are advantages. I find sometimes I like running down imaging with other frequencies, but you can't pick which one is either mega or other ones. So I run mega if I have mega. If I didn't have mega, I run 455. I never run 800. 800 kilohertz is for like saltwater fishing. It blows out the screen. No need to do that. Okay. Let's see. Chris says there are gizzard shad on my home lake, Pierce Lake in Illinois. So yeah, Chris, if you have gizzard shad in your lake, it's the exact same thing. It'll set up identical. So all stuff I talked about in all these lakes, it'll be the exact same, no difference there. Jess, let's see here. Have you already done a lake breakdown for Lake Jordan, North Carolina? If not, how can we make that happen? I believe there was a Lake Jordan breakdown done. I think I have it right here somewhere. Yeah, Everett B. Jordan Lake. I think it was a fall breakdown. We need to redo for the different seasons. So I'll get down a summer breakdown for that one for you. Yeah, we've done that before. Bass Assassin says, hey, Wisconsin, you ever fish Puckaway or Fox Lake? Many, many times. I've been on Puckaway and Fox Lake very often. My grandparents actually are very close to Fox Lake up in Wisconsin still. And then Lynn says, give me that northern information soon. Yeah, we can try to make that happen. I can maybe do a seminar for all you northern guys. Just do a complete breakdown on fishmoment.com about northern fishing just in general, how it all works, because you can relate a lot of the information I talk about on my channel to northern fishing, but a lot of the YouTubers out there are not fishing on northern lakes, and the info is very different. So I can maybe try to set something up for you guys. Question from so how do you break down those points? So if I'm breaking down like a point, guys, let me just kind of pull up Google Earth really quick. So let me try to find a point that it has where I can draw the lake down. I'll come over here real quick. So really on a point, what you're focused on, and I'm just going to go to one of these points just because I have the lake drawn down on this lake. So if we pull up Google Earth, here's a point. Now, if we take a look at this point right here, underwater, obviously when the lake is high, it's going to be completely underwater, but when it's more exposed, when the lake is lower, you can see what's kind of going on with this point. So the first thing I want to do whenever I fish a point is I want to graph over it to see where the cover is. In this case, you have a nice rocky patch here and a nice rocky patch right here. So if I was going to fish this point, I would basically target it first up by putting my boat over here in deeper water, casting up into shallower water and trying to bring my bait across that nice rocky patch right there. I would then turn my boat and put it a little bit more towards the tip of the point and cast straight up into shallow water, trying to parallel that rocky patch. Finally, I would move my boat over here and I would make casts back in from this side of the point, back into deeper water, and also cross this shallow rocky spot right here. This is obviously going to change depending on which point you're fishing. For example, if you're over on this point over here, this is a little subtle underwater point like this. This situation, I can basically cover this entire point by setting up my boat maybe out in this area, casting up and dragging my bait. And I might move my boat kind of in a semicircle over here, casting from multiple angles across this point, trying to target those rocks they're setting up on top of it. So it kind of just depends on the point you're fishing, but in general, I like to try to fish it from multiple angles. I'm not just going to pull up straight on this point and cast right across. I'm going to make kind of, if I drew a little thing here, I'm going to make like more of a semicircle around that point like this, or if I was fishing around this point, I would kind of do a similar thing. I'll kind of make a semicircle around that point. This point's going to take longer to fish because there's multiple key stretches to check out. This point will take significantly less time because it's just one spot. Okay. Have you ever fished in West Virginia? No, I'm actually going to be in West Virginia, though, in a couple of weeks, but not for fishing, just for a family trip. How do you fish in 25 to 30 mile an hour winds in deep water? I'd assume you just keep going heavier, do anything to keep the bow out of your line. Yeah, that's really, really tough on the water or when you have that rough of water. What I try to do usually is that I try to use that wind to my advantage. So this happens a lot on Grand Lake over here in Oklahoma. And what I try to do is I will find stretches of the lake where the wind can be used to my advantage. So for example, if there's a really heavy wind that's blowing from the north in this direction, what that usually will do is create opportunities where that wind's going to be blowing across a point like this. The wind's going to be blowing like this across this point. What that does is it's usually going to set up the fish in an ambush mode somewhere around this part of the point. Those fish are going to be using that wind to catch any bait fish and things like that to go across this point. So what I'll do is I'll set up my boat kind of in the area behind this point that's a little bit protected from the wind. So I'm not basically setting my boat in the wind, directly in the wind. I'll kind of stay a little bit out of the wind, but I'll cast my bait up into the wind and kind of use the wind as current. I will use heavier baits. I'll go up to like a 3/4 ounce or a 1 ounce football jig, big Carolina rig, big heavier swim bait, whatever it is, trying to make sure I can maintain feel of the bait. As long as you can feel the bait and feel the bottom, that's all that really matters. But once I get into this area, I'm just going to fire my bait across this point, work it back over the top of that point, kind of with the current. I might even move this a little bit more like over here, so I'm still protected from the wind, but I'm casting more into the wind than not. And that's kind of how I would work this point. Same thing goes for ledges, other areas. I kind of try to position my boat so that I'm still fishing wind-blown areas, but my boat is in protected areas. Let's see here. Do you think that the threadfin shad spawn in is normally more conducive to catching smaller males? No, so Kai, the threadfin shad spawn is just as good for catching big fish. It's just if you have gizzard shad in your lake, those bigger fish are going to be drawn to those bigger gizzards, so you're going to catch bigger fish around the gizzard shad spawn. If there are no gizzard shad in your lake, though, and there's only threadfin shad, then you'll catch a bunch of big fish around the threadfin shad as well. So don't worry so much about, don't get too caught up about whether it's threadfin or gizzard, but if you have both in your lake, go find the gizzard shad, because usually you're going to catch better quality fish in general. And that's not just for the shad spawn, that's just in general year-round. Let's see here. How many hours do you think you've put on your big motor just graphing? So currently my engine it's just reached 1,000 hours on my engine, and I would say probably about 900 of those hours is graphing. Only about 100 of those hours is actually running the boat, because I don't actually run my boat that much. I just graph. So probably 900 hours of idling on my boat, and I probably put in another 1,000, maybe 2,000 hours on other people's boats. Going fishing, I didn't always just fish out of my boat. I would go with friends and stuff. So I probably put about, I would say 3,000 hours of graphing behind the wheel, graphing over the years. Let's see here. Have you ever fished a double fluke rig? No, I've never done that. So something maybe to check out in a future video. And what's the best largest swim bait for the shad spawn? So a couple different ones. I don't really throw like giant swim baits that much, because I don't have like those big Texas bass are really, really big, and I think I need to start throwing some bigger swim baits. But I throw just like a 6-inch mag draft or like a 7-inch Bass Trick swim bait like this. But a lot of those guys were throwing those glide baits and catching them really well. I've never really thrown a lot of glide baits over the years. Something I definitely want to check out. It's a very situational kind of niche bait, because those shad need to be up there very shallow while they're spawning. I've, over the years, found that I catch them just as well, or I guess I don't really know. I've never thrown the glide baits, but those really, really big topwaters. This is the 6 Sense Mag Dog. It's a 6-inch walking topwater bait. Here's a regular Czar spook. It looks tiny compared to it. I think the really big walking topwater catch him just as well. That's what Lee Livesey caught the majority of his really big fish on during that tournament. Something about just a big shad on the surface seems to really get those fish to bite. How would you fish offshore in a tidal system like the Potomac River? If I was fishing the Potomac River, usually, William, it's going to be either on some sort of offshore grass, or like big grass mats, like big grass beds, or if you can find some sort of offshore hard area, like a big rock pile, things like that. If there's rock out there, like a big rock pile, something that breaks up the current, it's usually going to be a current break, though. So if you're offshore, it's really just going to be something that's usually in, I would say Potomac River, you're looking in the 4 to 8 foot range. Something that just breaks up the current, whether it's a big rock, a big boulder, a sunken barge, something like that. That's what I'd be looking for. MD Basson says, it's all good, I am here. I need to get a glide. I need to get a glide bait. Apparently, yeah. The ones that the guys were throwing were pretty crazy on over on Lake Fork. Let me pull that article up really quick, because I thought it was fascinating that what these guys were throwing. Let me find this. The big thing that I noticed is that even like Chris Zaldane, he's sponsored by Megabass, he wasn't throwing the traditional Megabass glide baits. Just give me a second here. I'm just scrolling through this article. He wasn't throwing the Megabass glide bait, which I thought was really fascinating. So if I transition over here really quick, here we go. So a couple of baits the guys were throwing. So obviously, just kind of wanted to walk you through some of the baits these guys were fishing. Let me get my face out of here. Just give me a second. Here. I'm not blocking everything. There we go. So Seth Fighter, he was catching them on a 6-inch mag draft. Already kind of talked about that. That was a good deal. Catching them on a big super shad wrap. That's basically like a regular, it's like a musky bait basically, which is just a really big shad imitator, similar to that 8.0 crankbait I talked about earlier. Caught fishing a swim jig, and then throwing just a regular spark shad, 5-inch spark shad in the back of a swim bait head. Now Chris Zaldane, he caught some fish on the big 8-inch mag draft, but he was throwing this bait right here. This is the Tater Hog Custom Lures Hog Father Swim Bait. This swim bait basically looks like a big gizzard shad, and Megabass makes some really good glide baits, but those fish seem to really want a gizzard shad imitating glide bait, something that looked like just like a gizzard shad. So that is kind of what the deal was. It seemed like you need to have something that was, and here's that 8, or he was on the 4.0, the 4.0 square bill. The 8.0 works really well. Big swim bait here. I think that was third place. Striking top water. Again with, let's see here. Here we go. With Patrick Walters, he was throwing a gizzard shad imitating glide bait that has the shape and size and look of a gizzard shad as opposed to a regular glide bait that looks more kind of like a trout, I guess. Same thing if we look at, here's that big saltwater head and spook, similar size to that one I'm throwing, that Mega Dog, but it has 3 hooks, which is really nice. I need to check this one out for sure. And then he was throwing the 316 Lure Company Workhorse glide bait. So again, designed like a gizzard shad. That's kind of the idea. So if you're getting into the glide bait market, that's a whole deal I have not really messed with. Maybe that's something I need to start experimenting with more. I've never been a big glide bait guy myself, but I can see in that situation why that could be deadly, and it probably is a bait that less people throw than other baits. I'm sure other guys still throw them out there, but maybe it's a little bit less seen because those baits are expensive. I'm sure that bait is like $50 to $100. I have no idea how much it is, but that's a lot. It's going to be very expensive. I'm sure you can't buy them right now. They're probably sold out completely. So yeah, that's good luck getting your hands on one of those. Let's see here. So a couple more questions. Fisherman, how do you graph or use your electronics to help fish primary grass lakes with hydrilla and coontail? I need to make a whole separate video on that. I'm going to make a video hopefully on that here coming up soon. I need to get to a lake with some hydrilla. Very hard to do in Northwest Arkansas area, Table Rock, stuff like that. We just have basically rock holes. But I need to get myself back down to Central Arkansas, get to Lake Ouachita. I'll make some videos on grass electronic stuff later this year. Let's see here. And then a couple more questions. One comment here. I think the amount of people in here shows you people need to be subscribing. I've been in other rooms that people have a lot more than 100,000 subscribers with less people in the room. Make sure to subscribe, guys. I did have a lot more viewers on the live stream when we used to have it on the Fish the Moment YouTube channel, but a lot of guys were getting confused when I was posting live streams and then YouTube videos, so I switched it over to this Fish the Moment live channel. So make sure to subscribe to this channel if you're subscribed over on the main Fish the Moment channel. Sorry, there's 2 channels. That's confusing, but it seemed to work out better. Viewership is down on the live stream, but that's just, I feel like it's better to make the YouTube content pop and make sure you guys can see all of our highly edited content. Again, I spend 30 to 40 hours every single week making one YouTube video that I post for free on YouTube. The best way to support us, guys, if you guys appreciate the effort, appreciate the time we put into all that, is to head over to our virtual seminars page on fishmoment.com and sign up for one of our seminars. Here's a seminar. I'm just going to get my face out of here. A couple seminars, again, really quick to check out. One is our offshore, advanced offshore summer bass fishing seminar. Another one is a seasonal bass movement seminar. There's only 7 spots available for this offshore summer secrets seminar. And so definitely sign up. I'll be talking about how to catch suspended fish on big flutter spoons, a lot of other sneaky baits I don't talk about on the channel at all. The thing with these seminars, guys, is I try to give away information that I never share in YouTube videos in these seminars. A lot of content I put out, obviously, it's very detailed, but I try to hold back the best of the best for these seminars. You're in a small group of people, so don't worry about, there's not like a million people in these seminars, so you're getting really, really good info. Randy and I hold back stuff for these seminars just so you guys get a lot of value. It's just the way we can support ourselves and make sure that we can continue making videos every single week. And I know you guys understand, but again, I also try to make the highest quality content. A lot of the basic instruction and stuff I like to put out there for free on YouTube, on the main Fish the Moment channel. And I spend as much time as I possibly can on each video to make sure that they're really, really detailed. The information in the seminars is a lot more advanced, a lot more detailed oriented. So if you really want to go to the next level with your fishing, definitely check out our seminars on fishthemoment.com. So guys, that is pretty much it. There's a bunch of questions rolling in, but I need to close up for the night. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Sorry for the problems at the beginning if you were here at the beginning where my audio wasn't working. And hopefully you guys will tune in next week when Randy comes back from Pickwick Lake, and we're going to be doing another live stream recapping his Pickwick Lake tournament, what went right, what went wrong. Hopefully he caught 30 pounds of fish, and you'll be able to share how he absolutely dominated that tournament. And we'll also be talking about a bunch of other topics as always. So join us next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on the Fish Moment Live channel. Also check out the main Fish Moment channel this Friday. I'm going to be making a video showing some really cool tricks with Google Earth. Some of you guys probably know them, but I'm kind of going to refresh the video and show you guys how to find some really cool stuff on Google Earth and transfer those waypoints straight to your fish finder for all 3 brands of units. So definitely check out that video coming up this Friday. Hopefully you enjoyed this live stream, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good night.